About a very different cultural, political context, obviously looking at urban transitions, which is Korea, Seoul in particular. So I would like to talk about social innovation, and here I think it's interesting that we have two presentations that start out from the social dimension of sustainability and exploring, using that to explore sustainability in urban context. Well, before anything, maybe I would like to know from your side, what do you think about when you think about Seoul? What is it that comes to your mind?
Good food.
Good food.
Innovative country.
Innovative country, that's interesting, okay. But high tech, right?
Yes, mostly.
Anything else? Style. Right. Very important, we'll come back to that later.
Heavy traffic.
Okay.
Very fast internet.
Expensive housing.
Right.
Fast urbanization.
Also that, yes. Fast urbanization. High density.
Homogeneous local society. But I mean, these are naive, ethnic
homogeneity, yes,
yeah.
yes, that's true. There's a very low percentage of foreigners overall in Korea. Still, Seoul makes for an exception in that regard a little bit, but no comparison with our major cities. Okay. Just for an overview, usually, I mean, there is some reflection of Seoul and of Korea in the media recently, mainly due to some major events, from the soccer championship to the visit of the Pope, maybe. So that provides for some insight into society, which is usually quite marginal to our perceptions, at least compared to Japan, certainly, and also compared to China, which is very dominant in many regards. So, talking about Seoul is, of course, necessary to highlight some of the basic features of that city. It is a city with 10 million inhabitants that has, well, if you take the capital region, it's 25 million, so it's actually the second largest urban metropolitan area in the world. It's also heavy weighing on the national development, of course. So it's 25% of the national population, 50% of the national GDP. Well, this kind of concentration comes at a price, obviously. So you have a very strong reliance on 80% actually fossil imported fuels in this area. You have a very strong reliance on resources which are not from Seoul, so outside the jurisdiction in terms of water, electricity anyway, but also in terms of waste. Yeah? So the whole urban metabolism actually relies on areas which are outside the jurisdiction. And you have certainly also mega trends which are quite influential on the overall development. Aging, most of all, socio-demographic change, I should rather say, because there is a change in family structures, smaller units, and individualization, you could say. And aging overall, Korea has the lowest, one of the lowest birth rates overall globally. I think 1.2 is the current rate. So that's a very fast track forward in terms of aging. Other aspects, also green space, obviously. Green space share per capita is around 5 square meters. Very low compared to other cities. Yeah, so that reflects a little bit the densification process that has taken place. But also in terms of the social and, well, political economic development, some notions. There is, of course, this process of political transition after the totalitarian regime since the 90s, not to be forgotten, not so long ago, and therefore a pretty strong imprint on current institutional and decision-making cultures. There is also the very quick economic growth that came in pair with that transition to democracy. Started a little bit earlier and already during the totalitarian regime, pushed by American financial help, financial support in the 60s. But what it brought about was, of course, a very heavy process of urbanization. Urbanization that express itself in infrastructure developments, but also in terms of massive densification, housing, and offices in the large cities. So those structures you certainly find not only in Seoul, but Seoul is the most exponent, the strongest exponent of that kind of development. The typical heritages of that kind of very fast development and totalitarian background are issues related to current day government styles. You know, things like well, a lack of transparency, and participation in decision making, overall an authoritative style in decision making and governing from the national to the local level. But also a general mistrust of people in institutions, in government, broadly speaking, and therefore a very low level of self-organization within society, self-organization within civil society in particular, and the possibility to therefore respond to changes and actively shape maybe also changes. And this is where, of course, the linkage to transition comes in. A very sadly actually demonstrated recently through this Sable ferry disaster. I don't know whether that has had any coverage here, but that pretty well illustrated how societal institutions completely failed in actually responding to a disaster situation in this particular case. But it made transparent this dysfunctionality, this incapacity of escaping from the top-down order implementation of change. So change can happen, and it can happen very quickly, but it has to be top-down. Urbanization, I mentioned, and that had particular forms, or shaped particular forms. The massive inflow of people into the cities and the massive growth had to be accommodated, and this is the predominant form within which people have been accommodated. So apartments, apartment blocks or apartment complexes. Now, if we look at this, we usually think of that in terms of social housing. Far from that. An apartment in Seoul starts from €500,000, not dollar. So also this kind of structure would have to be considered as a future and life-term investment in a way. But what it brought about, of course, in the restructuring of the city were processes of massive segregation, expulsion, gentrification, therefore also in the form of gated communities and, well, gradually moving up the ladder of quality and price, of course, in terms of real estate, but also in terms of the spatial structures, like taking big parts of the city that have been, well, old fabrics, low-rise fabrics, that have gradually disappeared, and that now became structured by this very homogeneous fabric that has, of course, a number of weaknesses, and it comes with a number of problems in terms of sustainability. Environmental performance is certainly the first thing that you might think about. Energy, the whole resource issue, water, and materials, but also noise. Yeah? So a lot of things which are very badly managed by this. And even more importantly, the social aspects of that. The typology is not fit for demographic change. You cannot easily change the typology of these buildings. It has a lot of problems in terms of social conflicts because there's a high fluctuation, so no trust between neighbors. There's a very high number of fierce conflicts also due to the fact that those are largely owned apartments, and together with the fluctuation, that means you have actually a market going on, yeah, and it needs change. So these are very typical characteristics. And well, in addition, I mentioned gentrification and gated communities. That has a very is a very strong form, of course, of manifesting kind of social and socio-economic segregation in the urban fabric. Now, what kind of responses have been created by the city? The former mayor and later president, Marc, started out to respond by grand projets, the large-scale projects that were meant to basically put Seoul back on the map of the international marketplace and to provide a greener and more friendly, more sustainable somehow image at least. This is one of the most emblematic projects in this regard, the restoration of the Cheonggyecheong stream, so a downtown channel that was originally, of course, a river. It has been restored and provided for a new green space in the city center. Also other large-scale projects like the first very huge park area in the city. They stem from that kind of approach, obviously. Now, more recently, however, there has been a more radical shift in the local policy and politics that came about, or that manifested itself actually in the election of the current mayor, Park Won-soon. He is very strongly emphasizing very different notions linked to citizen participation, linked to social innovation in particular. This is where he comes from. He has a background in that context. And also to transparency. So that's where the current projects are stemming from in terms of, for instance, the sharing economy, in terms of the open government is another highlight, or lighthouse project, and in terms of social innovation. There we have the strands in terms of the social economy, social enterprises, and more specifically, village communities. This is what I would like to focus on today. So social innovation and village communities, that's the linkage here. Why would that provide a contribution to urban sustainable urban development? Well, social or village communities are not a new thing. They are actually quite old. Some of them have an old tradition of maybe up to 20 years in Seoul. And they are like place-based social networks that aim at fulfilling very basic social needs, from identity and care provision between neighbors to more extensive things like green space provision, also housing, co-housing ideas, but also things like health and food. So this is a very wide range actually of basic needs which are being addressed by these communities. So that is obviously a policy strand which does not derive from the political ecology and economy of the city. It's not looking at the strategic context that should safeguard resource access and so forth. It's also not so much the environmental driver behind that, but it's really focusing on the social problems. And these are very high on the agenda in the population. So rankings of all kinds look at that, and they put the focus on education, put the focus on care and on welfare and social cohesion and the likes. But it also has another driver, which is maybe the political, fiscal driver, which is that the welfare expenditures are rising, but the tax base is shrinking. So the city is massively under pressure to do more with less. And, well, of course, scarcity of resources makes for creativity. That's one of the key drivers here. And I'm sorry for the words. But this is probably necessary to explain a little bit the structure which is behind this approach. Very roughly, that's an analysis of the governance structure which is meant to support the creation and establishment of village communities in Seoul. So it is a policy framework, and that's interesting, so to actually connect social innovation and policy, which is strongly driven by this unit here, Innovation Bureau. It is a unit which is directly adjacent or connected to the mayor's office, so very high in the administration, and therefore like a thorn in the flesh of the local government, because their role is actually to break routines and to do things differently. So that's one of the strengths that they're focusing on. What they did was, over a 1-year process, the support center has been created. That was a process of interaction between some society actors that sort of came up with this governance design, actually. So what is needed in order to address actually this mistrust between citizens and the administration, in order to provide suitable and targeted support for communities and people who, like activists who want to change things at the local level. So that's a crucial unit, the support center. It's a small unit actually, 30 people, just like Drift maybe, that are coming mainly from the civil society sector, so people that have been working with communities and in community activities for a long time, which are running this independently. And the whole process is like a call for proposals. So you can apply for that, and the kind of support which is provided ranges from obviously financial support, so you can get some seed funding, but also less material, so training, information, knowledge, skills. This is quite crucial. There's a whole learning process around what can be done and how this could be done in these communities. And it's being gradually decentralized. Seoul has 26 districts which are governed relatively independently. 5 minutes. These district levels, they have, through the last call for proposals, created their own support center. So at a level which is sort of closer to the ultimate community, to the ultimate target group, therefore. There is a general framework for, influencing the policy design, so that there's a very vivid feedback, actually, of implementation into how the whole setup is being lived through the steering committee that has representatives from all parties. Actually, the majority within that is from civil society, so it's not even equitable shares here in terms of votes. This is looking at the evolution of actual projects, so what kind of projects are being implemented. It started out actually with some ideas about certain categories. They were developed through task forces and brainstormings of people involved, and they included categories that were to be expected, things like education, care, and so forth. Now, what is interesting in development is, if you look at these darker pieces of cake here, the share of the ones which are actually completely open categories. So they have no category or no orientation whatsoever. They're completely bottom up. So you can do like anything that is being supported by your community that addresses actually social needs. So there are some general criteria, of course, for the selection. And this is the completely open category here, the largest one currently. This is the one which is also very open, but it's linked to the apartments. This is the one which is addressing the apartment blocks, so anything, communities in these apartment complexes. And another one to be highlighted is this small cake here, piece of cake. This is renewable energy, or rather, energy neutral development. So that's something which has been on the agenda from the outset, and it's slowly growing. Obviously, this is not for every community from the start. It's also not the main focus of the whole scheme. But the interesting thing is that environment and energy issues, they are increasingly being taken up and woven into all these other aspects and all the other community initiatives as well. Be that through green space development, be that through issues in terms of housing, building construction, in terms of food, in terms of health. So there are a lot of interactions, obviously. So starting from the social concerns and social needs, it's in particular environmental aspects which are being addressed now. And this is, of course, a very important perspective, which is the spatial dimension. So how does that develop in space? And what you can see that it's, of course, not a very equal development. It can be explained. It's path dependent. Depends on what kind of density of civil society organizations you've had previously, what kind of socio-economic structure you've had. So, for instance, this here is Gangnam. No demand whatsoever in terms of community development, whereas others have been pretty much spearheading and forerunning in this context. I think areas like Sungkyung up in the north, which is a very active working district. So you had a lot of people active in the field there anyway. So that raises, of course, questions in terms of how do you deal with this disparity that is being created through policy. So you have a great variety, a great diversity of initiatives that provide for possibilities in terms of learning, in terms of networking, perhaps in terms of upscaling. But it is at the same time conflicting with a fundamental objective of spatial planning, which is equity of living conditions. So how to develop the right strategy out of this mixture will be a challenge for the future. And with that, I mean, doing right to the diversity of initiatives that can be found there is very difficult through any kind of images. So this is just a very arbitrary collection and selection, obviously. But what it illustrates, I hope at least it has illustrated that to some degree through this very short presentation, is that there is a very high potential for actually combining approaches in terms of strategic governance at the city level, and also downwards towards the scales which are usually not so well discussed, especially in the literature about transitions. The neighborhood scale, the block scale, the building scale even. And approaches which are focusing on social innovation, which are focusing on people and social networks, milieux. Now that is, these are two strands, quite separately handled so far. Yeah. And I think the approach that Seoul is following currently is illustrating that there is a big potential precisely in cities, of course, for combining these two things. Especially the literature on social innovation and grassroots is very poor in actually conceptualizing why there is an urban condition for this. Why transition towns are not so influential and have little perspectives to be so in the future, because they are developing in very small rural villages. Whereas happening in large cities, it's a different story. Okay, so having said that, I would like to conclude, and maybe the next time somebody asks you about Seoul, you might also think about social innovation.